Hi, and welcome to Palette and Palette, my two channels about art and cooking. Art, because I teach art classes, and cooking because I wrote a cookbook called Pop It in the Toaster. I'm going to show you how to make rosemary lentils. This is actually a recipe that I created. I think the challenge was to make lentils interesting. They're very good for you. But like a lot of things that are good for you, it's like, how can you make them taste halfway decent? This is a particularly good recipe because the lentils are oven baked. So that wonderful, subtle, lovely, nut-like flavor that they have is retained in this process. Now this recipe is on 176 of my Pop It in the Toaster Oven cookbook. And it just really takes just a few great ingredients, and like so many of my recipes, you just put everything together, pop it in the toaster oven, and when you come back it is done and ready. Now the cook time on this recipe, the total time is 45 minutes. So if you have other things to do, it's not going to take up a lot of time. The one thing is with this recipe, I am recommending an addition of roasted garlic. It just makes this dish so fabulous. Now you can buy roasted garlic, but I also have a recipe for it on page 75 in Pop It in the Toaster Oven. And what it entails is getting 3 buds of garlic, that's the whole garlic bud, putting them on an 8x8 pan and baking them at 450 for about 20. The nice thing about roasted garlic is, I think, it tastes better than what you can buy. So once the garlic is baked in your toaster oven, and that's at 450 for about 20 minutes, then you can put it in a covered container and add salt, pepper, maybe some olive oil to it, and it'll keep in your refrigerator. And you can store the roasted garlic in your refrigerator in a covered container, and that's what I've done here. So the roasted garlic that I'm using in this lentils recipe is garlic that I made. So now I'm going to show you the ingredients that you're going to need for the rosemary lentils, but before I do anything else, I'm going to preheat my toaster oven to 400 degrees. So here's the ingredients you'll need for the rosemary lentils, and what a pretty still life this is actually. I'm saying the recipe an 8x8 by 2-inch baking pan. In this case, I'm using like a quart casserole size. Any oven safe ware you can use, but it should be about this size. And then over here I have my bay leaves, 2 bay leaves and sprig of rosemary. Now I have tons of rosemary outside. If you don't have any rosemary, you can certainly use dried rosemary, and that will be good. Over here I have 1.25 cups of water. I have 1/4 cup of lentils. I have 2 tablespoons of the roasted garlic. My homemade roasted garlic. I think you should give that a try. I have 2 tablespoons of tomato sauce here. That's just regular canned tomato sauce. Now on the recipe in the book, it calls for 2 tablespoons of buttermilk. I'm not really fond of drinking buttermilk. I don't know how you feel about it. One thing you could do is substitute the buttermilk for 2 tablespoons of Greek yogurt, which is what I did here. Okay, so all of the ingredients except the tomato sauce and the buttermilk or Greek yogurt, they're going to go in later. So what I'm going to be putting in here is 1/4 cup of lentils, 1.25 cups of water. Now I mashed up the garlic so it'll blend in really well with the lentils. There's the bay leaves and the rosemary, and then I'm going to add, to taste for me, a little bit of salt, 1/4 teaspoon. That's what I like, and then freshly ground pepper, my favorite things. And it's all mixed up. Isn't that pretty? It has this sort of oriental look to it. I'm going to cover this with aluminum foil. And it's always mentioned that many times the domed lids on this kind of casserole will not fit in the toaster oven, so you can use aluminum foil. Okay, so the toaster oven is up to temperature at 400. So I'm going to put the rosemary lentil mixture in there, and then I'm going to set the timer for 35 minutes. In my recipe I say, or until the lentils are tender. So depending on your toaster oven, you may want to check at 35 minutes to see if they are tender. Wow, I discovered an interesting thing about this rosemary lentils. And this does happen. It happens to the best of us. First of all, though, I'm just getting rid of the bay leaves. And taking these out right now. What I discovered is I think that this recipe, the amount of it and the amount of water that was in there, I'm thinking that it was not written correctly. That I'm thinking that this recipe should have been 1/2 cup of lentils instead of 1/4 cup. And sometimes that happens. A proofreader, even a real good one, doesn't catch it. And the reason why I think that happened is because now if I add, and it's still a little watery anyway, but now if I add the tomato sauce, and this could be buttermilk, but in this case, of course, it's the yogurt. And the gist of this whole thing is that, you know, the yogurt won't curdle, so it'll give it a really nice, smooth texture. Now, my guess is this probably tastes just great, but the consistency is like a soup. It is good. So now I'm going to have my lentil soup, and I'm going to eat some crow with it. You can see that the lentils are fully cooked. It took just that amount of time, but there was a great deal of water. There's way too much water in this, and I'm thinking with 1/2 cup instead of 1/4 cup of lentils, this would be perfect.